Have you guys seen Esports and the E-League?
I don't know if that's sports, but it's great mindset.
But I don't know if athlete is the right word that I would go for.
If you don't break a sweat, I don't consider it a sport.
No, you
Watching people play video games isn't like watching people play football. It's like watching people play fantasy football. It is one more step removed from human activity. You understand?
It's video games. It shouldn't be on a sports network. It's video games.
Can it truly be a spectator sport?
It already is. 71 million watched it last year. They reckon it's going to, by 2017, it'll be 145 million people watching it.
They're actually giving college scholarships for video gaming.
You're kidding.
And it's even gone to the point that now the government has acknowledged professional video gamers as athletes.
Saving the break round. He got somebody. Bang is hiding and coming. Bang looking to come in. Here comes your initiation. The race. Oh my God! Thunder shockwave will find them all. And SKT, with a hell of a response, will take down 4.
You guys want to hear a story? It's his dad and his son, and they're radish farmers. The land they work on, they don't own it. So they're living off of these radish sales, and they're giving like 70% to the people that own the land, and they're living off the other 30%. Well, at some point, their mule that's driving the plow through the land just takes off. And the son runs in. He says, "Dad, the worst thing ever just happened." He says, "This mule just ran off. I couldn't catch it. We have no mule, and if we have no mule, we can't plow the field. And if we can't plow the field, we're not gonna have any radishes." The dad, in his wisdom, he says, "Yeah, I don't know what to make of that. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing." And the son's like, "What do you mean? We're gonna starve to death." So the next day, the mule comes running back down over the hill, and there's all these stallions following him. There's like hundreds of stallions. And the son says, "Dad, the greatest thing ever just happened." He says, "there's 100 stallions running around over the field. We're gonna sell horses for a living. We're gonna make it. We're gonna be just fine." And again, the dad, being more wise, he says, "I don't know. I don't really know what to make of that. I don't know how to call that yet. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing." Well, it turns out those 100 stallions, they belong to somebody. The kid taking care of them, the stallions, right? He's getting them ready to sell them and this and that. Well, one of them rears up and bucks him. Snaps his leg. The kid comes in the house. "Dad, I broke my leg. Oh my gosh," right? "The worst thing ever just happened. I can't work. I can't tend to the horses." The dad says, "I don't know what to make of that. I don't know how to call it. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing that you just broke your leg." Well, those horses, they belong to a bunch of samurai that were running down over the hill. And the samurai, there's tons of them, it's a whole army, right? They stop, they knock on the door, and they say, "Hey, we're going to fight. We're going to war. We need more able-bodied men, so get your son, tell him he's got to come fight with us." And the dad says, "I really wish I could, but you can see his leg is broken. He's not going to be able to join you guys, right?" And eventually all those samurai, they would go out and they would fight to the death and lose their life, and 1,000 samurai would just die, but the son lives. The moral of the story is, whether it be good or bad, you really don't know whether it's truly good or bad.
What type of high school kid were you?
So, bad student, I'll just say it right out of the gate. I remember being brought into, I guess what you would call like a teacher's intervention almost, where they had all these teachers that were on this board, and they said, "You know, we're thinking about maybe having you expelled. You don't seem to fit in here. You don't want to be here. You're failing all your classes. We don't know how to get through to you. You know, what's the deal?" And I remember I told him, I said, "I just want to be a fighter. I want to make money in boxing, and that's going to be my career. And again, being a young whippersnapper, I don't know how any of this stuff is going to help me at all." And that was the mentality. And I look back now, and I think that was extremely immature. And really, you should get knowledge wherever you can find it. I actually remember In a particular game, there was a player, this guy's name was Shells, and he really took me under his wing and showed me how seriously some of these people take it. I remember kind of the first night we were using this app called Ventrilo. He took me over Ventrilo and he was showing me spreadsheets and all these numbers and these calculations and things like that. And I just, it was all this scientific method to it. And here I am just thinking, I thought we just play this game. He said, no, you study the game, you take it very seriously. I was already decently talented at it, but he took me and refined me into something more. Esports, to me, it was truth. The world, for the most part, is very unpredictable, whereas in esports, it's very methodical. Like I said, you can take a scientific approach to it, so you can predict outcomes. You can essentially create your own future. If you take chess, for example, I can calculate, 5-10 moves ahead what the board state is going to look like. It's your ability to predict the future, control outcomes. Like I said before, my goal is to take that idea and let kids know that you can do that in life too, to a certain extent. That life is not all random. There's cause and effect. Boxing in Rockford, typically you're talking about, and this is just generality, you're typically talking about low-income families, you're talking about rough neighborhoods. It's kind of a stereotype to say that golf would be like a wealthy person's sport. Well, boxing and fighting for a living, that's typically the other way. That's the opposite end of the spectrum. And anytime you have poverty, low income, these types of things, rough neighborhoods, I mean, you're gonna have violence, you're gonna have people who, they've got criminal records, all of that. I remember one night in the gym, it was just 3 of us sparring, 2 older guys, they're both much older than I was, and they had got into it. One of them cut the other person in the ring boxing, and I remember he kept saying, "You marked my face, you marked my face," and the other one called him a cuss word, a bad name, a punk essentially, and he said, "Oh, I'm a punk," and he went out to the car and he got his gun, and he's waving it around, and here I am. Again, this is what my parents and everybody tries to tell you, but you're too stupid as a kid, you don't know. And so here I am standing in front saying, "No, don't do it, don't do that, don't shoot him." Not realizing I could have easily lost my life that night, And throughout my life and throughout boxing, I kept finding myself in those situations. And I really think that had I kept going with that, I have no idea what would have happened. I really, truly have no idea. I know that most of the people I boxed with are in prison. Most of them actually all went to prison. When I started working at the sheriff's department as a corrections officer, my coach was in prison, saw him in there. Most of the guys I sparred with were in prison. These are young guys, a lot of them. One of them, he was murdered, his kids were murdered. And the same thing there. I mean, we're talking about people who are willing to murder kids and how vicious, how ruthless is that situation. Just knowing the lack of care for life. And I mean, that was my world back then, and I thought I was so bad and so tough that it could never happen to me. Nothing bad's ever gonna happen to me, and I know now, looking back, that that's so wrong. And so esports took me out of it. It put me in my room in a chair playing a game for 16 hours a day. And so you don't have a whole lot of time to go out and get in trouble. I remember when I really got into it and kind of disappeared for a while, you'd get these calls saying, "Do you want to accept a call from such and such a state prison?" I would get those calls from my coaches, from guys I boxed with, and it was always, "Hey, I'm going to be getting out, are you going to be at the gym?" and this and that. I just wouldn't answer. Something was telling me, as much as I loved boxing, to not go back to it. Just stay away from it. And so in that way, breaking my arm, you think it's like this horrible thing, right? And it's this dream-ending thing, but it's actually like one of the best things that ever happens to you. So when I broke my arm, like I said, I think that kind of made me take esports more seriously and ultimately saved my life from some tragic ending.
When did you achieve that #1 rating?
I was about 17 years old, I think 16 or 17.
And how many hours were you gaming a day?
All day, every day. I was very driven about what I wanted, and if it wasn't that, I didn't care about it. And the same was true once I started in esports, like with World of Warcraft. Once I set my sight on that I wanted to be the best player in my position, it was every waking hour. I would sleep at school, so I'd stay up all night, and I knew that bedtime was at school. But I got to where I wanted to go.
What were some challenges you experienced during esports?
That's a tough one. I'd say one of the first difficulties was societal pressure and allowing other people to tell me what I should do with my life. In World of Warcraft, I was rated the #1 Holy Paladin. I had the highest rating of any player in the world. When I reached that, I felt like there was nothing else to accomplish. And I remember telling my friends at the time that I was going to put the game down because society, so school, everybody was telling me that this is a waste of time, that it's never going to go anywhere. And so I actually would put the game down and I would quit and I would stop competing in esports for the next few years. And I would just focus purely on work and trying to have a career because esports, even now, but definitely back then, was not something that you did as a career. So it was just something nobody understood. I'm that way, where if I'm focused on one thing, I'm just on the one thing. When I was about 22, that's when I kind of had this dream to go back. Life was getting real dark. I think you start to realize at some point when you're on the wrong path, and that happened to me. I felt like I woke up one day and realized this path I was on was somebody else's path. It was my family's path, or what they wanted for me. So what I did was, I've always been a saver. I've always been good with money. I saved up like $50,000. I was working at the sheriff's department at the time, and I said that I'm going to take this $50,000 and I'm going to use it to live off of while I try to pursue this esports dream. I thought it would only take me, a year or two to get all my ducks in a row and to establish myself, but it took much, much longer than that, and I was not prepared for that financially. And so at some point, esports, trying to live that dream, it wasn't paying the bills. I mean, money was hard. I had a significant other, had a child. I mean, it was brutal financially. Esports, in my opinion, at the time, was very all or nothing. Either you were somebody or you were nobody. You felt like a moral obligation, at least for me. Like I said, I had a child, and so anyone that has a child knows that there's an obligation to feed them, to take care of them, and to more importantly than that, right beyond that, to spend time with them.
What'd you say?
It shows us the unfinished pyramid.
What do you think that's about?
It's real.
In esports, to anybody that's on the grind in esports, you play all day, every day. Traditional sports, I played them. I've been in them. Boxing, 2 days, 3 days, you thought that was difficult. When you start grinding for esports, you start to realize that it's an all-day endeavor. You're spending, at least 12 hours, 16 hours. I got to the point where the longest distance you're traveling is from wherever your chair is to the bathroom and back. And that's what you're doing all day. Because if you weren't doing that back then, you just weren't good enough. You weren't going to make it, because there was kids out there that would just sit there all day. And so if you wanted to compete against them, you had to be willing to do the same. But there's a moral responsibility, because your son needs you, your family needs you, your significant other needs you. Not only that, but your extended family, right? Your extended family who's known you, who's worked on the farm with you, who's done all these things, they all want your time. But esports being all or nothing, if I was going to make a living off of it, I just had to disappear for a while. And that weight is on you a lot. You miss the birthdays, the births, the deaths. I missed all of it. I didn't go to any of it. But it was because you feel this pressure of, if I don't succeed at this, then what do I have? All those teachers, all those people in your life that told you that, this wasn't the path, that it was never going to be anything, all of a sudden they're all right. And you're just some burnout. And so you're getting pulled from every which way. So there's a lot of struggle there. Health, it's not real healthy to be sitting in a chair 12, 16 hours a day. So if you were to look at like old boxing photos, ripped up, cut up, super jacked, and then you put on 100 pounds, 150 pounds, just sitting in the chair all day. So honestly, esports, it'll take everything from you. The first person I would say that really helped me was my grandfather, Ed. He didn't understand esports. He didn't understand why I would quit such a great career path of working in law enforcement and things like that, but he still supported it. He still said, if Jordan's doing it, I know there's got to be something to it. He's not a dummy, so there's got to be something there. And I remember we would be pen pals, and I would write to my grandfather, and he was actually the first person I told really the bigger picture, that I wanted to use esports as a vehicle essentially to change young people, to create a better culture, to create people that care about each other and about the world at large. And I was seeing all these influencers and things, but they're not the greatest, in my opinion, role models. And so I said, hey, I'm really good at this. I'm a player. And if I can generate a following like that, I can make being a good person the cool thing. And so that was actually the bigger picture, the more macro picture. And I told him about it, and he supported me 100%. There's a person, his name's Bosne, Shinsei Rashid. He's passed on now, so rest in peace to him. He's very young when he passed away. But I met him playing League of Legends, and I remember some things, I'm telling you, they're just fate, I'm telling you. I remember scrolling down the Twitch channels, and I'm looking for somebody to learn from, and the title, it was a medical school dropout to professional League of Legends player. And I thought that was so, you know, again, that's that controversy, that's that, this guy knows what he's talking about, you know, but I thought it was just a title, you know, so I clicked on it and I started talking to him. He didn't have a lot of followers back then, you know, he only had 1 or 2 people watching him. And I said, hey, I said, is that true? He says, what? I said, that you're dropping out of medical school to pursue this dream you have. And he said, it's absolutely true. I'm serious as a heart attack. And I was like, well, tell me about it. He directed me over to his, he has a WordPress, kind of where you write a diary on the internet. His whole story just resonated with me so much that he felt like he was always great at games and that society had kind of taken him off of that path and put him on a path to go to medical school. His parents were in the medical field, and at some point he felt very lost, like he was not doing what he was supposed to be doing in life. And I was like, gee, that sounds a lot like what I felt like I was going through. And so from that connection, we just became the best of friends. We became training partners, everything, man. We would read books together, you know, like the self-help type of books. We would read tons of those books, anything we thought that could make us better players. And his goal was to one day be one of the greatest League of Legends players to ever play.
Any second now. Any second now. BOOM! Congratulations, Summoner. You have been promoted to solo queue, Master Tier. Best of luck in the fields of justice.
The beauty of that story is that he did. So he became a challenger player in Europe, which is just the top 200 players in all of Europe. So if you think of the continent, Europe, I mean, there was over 100 million players at the time, and he's in the top 200. He moved to Japan, and he hit rank 1 over there, so he's the best player in the world in a game that had over 100 million players. And then he would pass away, tragically, in an accident. I don't know, man. Like, when I'm thinking about it or I'm praying to him at night, I always tell him, you know, you did it, man. It's like, to me, Shinsei and guys like that, they're so wise, man, because they know you got one shot. You got one shot to do whatever it is you want to do. And you never know when your time's up. You don't know. And so if he would have kept living out the same existence, you know, where he just was crying every day, he wasn't passionate about anything, felt lost, just going, doing what other people told him to do, and if he were to pass away in the same accident, think of that, like the waste. So for him to go out and do what he said he was going to do and accomplish it, you know, I mean, there's no words for something like that. And so Shinsei's story was really profound for me. It definitely changed my life while he was alive, and now that he's passed, you know, getting to talk about how he lived, it's changed not only my life, but I think Jeremeh and some of the other kids I talked to about him. I have his picture here at the Boys and Girls Club. I leave it on the wall just so I can talk about him. His family's donated money to the Boys and Girls Club because they know that esports was his thing. At the time, they didn't support him in it, you know. I know that they have a great deal of pain from that as well. I think as a parent, you can also get caught up. You know, you want what's best for your kids so bad, but sometimes you don't know what's, you know, you're just doing what you think is best, you know.
Do you have any regrets about anything esports related?
When you're trying to be the best at something, you give it everything, and I think at some point you make mistakes. I remember my grandpa died, and before he died, I guess he had asked to see me, and I just didn't go. I don't know, I have no, again, these are regrets we're talking about, so I hope Nobody out there is judging me, but when you're going all in on something, you're trying to be the best at something, you think for whatever reason that you can't miss a day, that you can't miss an hour. You think that you have to give every single minute of your time, and I know now looking back that that was not correct. I could have went, I could have saw my grandfather, I could have went to his funeral, especially if someone's requesting to see you. So that you can't undo that. You can't come back from that. You can't bring him back and tell him you're sorry. You can't do that. So that's a regret. And that would actually happen a few times. My aunt, she had a lot of medical problems all throughout her life. Super positive woman. But I remember she tried to get a hold of me I don't know how many times, and she was going through some very serious medical problems, and I just wouldn't answer the phone. She eventually come knock on the door. I looked out the window, peeked through the blinds, saw that it was her and her husband, and I just pretended I wasn't home, and then she passed away, and I never spoke to her. A good friend of mine asked if I'd be the best man in his wedding, and I told him no, that I wouldn't. He asked why, and I mean, they somewhat understood, but they didn't know how extreme I was. They said, what do you mean why? You know what I'm doing tomorrow. I'm not going to a wedding. I remember I used to say to people, everybody else was like, hey, what are you doing on Friday, Jimmy? And Jimmy might have some plans. I thought that was a luxury that I didn't have. So if somebody asked me, what are you doing on Friday, Jordan? I would say, grinding. What are you doing on Sunday? Grinding. And that's what I was doing all day, every day. So I wasn't the best man in his wedding, and I know he resents me for it to this day. So if you're watching, I apologize. I've apologized to him in person, but I know he resents me a little bit for it. There's some other weddings and things didn't go to. Babies were born, wasn't there. And again, looking back, you can always take a day. You can always take an hour, you know. Whether I took an hour or didn't, it didn't make me better or worse, you know. So in the grand scheme of things, if I could go back, I would definitely be present at all of those major moments. Those people were always present at my moments, so I feel like I let them down big time. The time when it was really tough was that initial, I was 22, I had the savings, which was all fine, but at some point that savings depleted. And I remember, like I said, I know we're kind of jumping around the timeline, but I remember I was practicing for League, I was climbing the ranks, League of Legends, and my significant other came in, and I remember she looked at me and she said, I'm in the middle of a match, by the way, and she just says, hey, I'm pregnant. And I was like, what now? You know, it didn't even hit me. It dawned on me, especially with her help, that I had to make something happen financially. She essentially told me that if I wasn't willing to be around, be a father, spend more time with my family, like her and my son, she didn't say exactly, but it was implied, right? That she was probably gonna have to separate or take off. And that was a really interesting time because right around that time that she had gotten pregnant, I had gotten a letter. League of Legends does this thing, it's called the North American Scouting Grounds.
Choosing an opportunity, a fact you're cruising out to. How you gonna make it to the league?
We are currently attending scouting grounds, so basically Riot invited the top 20, I believe, challengers. You take the ladder, you remove all the official LCS players, you invite the rest, and you also invite all the teams. You put all those people in the same area, and the teams are just there to scout potential new talents.
Well, I already, in my opinion, I was not like the best dad, I don't think at the time. We all lived together, and I would wake up my son and I'd wake up my significant other, and she would go to work, but on her way to work, she would take my son to the babysitters. But I wouldn't see him until they came home 10 o'clock at night. So I'd wake him up and I'd put him to bed. Well, to me, that's not really being a father. At the time, I thought I could make it all work somehow, but as he got older, I realized that that's not enough. Your kids need you more than that. And so when it came time for the North American Scouting Grounds, that's when I realized that this whole going professional, going and playing on a pro team and going out and living that life, that was never gonna happen for me. Because I didn't want it to happen. Because if you asked me and you said, do you want to be a father or do you want to go and play on a stage somewhere? To me, it was a no-brainer. I want to be a father. Who cares if I'm on a stage and I can beat the best players in the world if your son looks at you like you're a degenerate human being, or he doesn't love you, or who cares about all that money and fame? It doesn't mean anything. So at that point I had to have a real conversation with myself and say, what are you doing? You're not even going to go and play on these stages. I know that you worked this hard to get to that point, but at some point there was a disconnect in your brain where you didn't realize you were never going to leave your family. You were never going to leave your son. So what are you doing? And my significant other had essentially beat me to that idea first, because she gave me an ultimatum and told me that if I wasn't going to spend more time, or if I wasn't going to earn more money in it, then I would have to stop. So she wasn't going to just pick up and drop everything, and I feel like as a man I shouldn't make her. I just don't think that that's right. But what that caused, if you're not going to go chase the fame and the fortune, and you've given everything to do that, well, you're in a bit of a conundrum. So what happened was I ended up back at my first ever paycheck job, which was Burger King on Auburn and Kilburn. I asked them if I could work their third shift, emptying the freezer trucks and cleaning the fryers and doing all that type of stuff. But the reason I wanted that shift was because I wanted to still pursue esports, just in a different way, right? I wasn't ready to give up my dream, right? I just had to modify it a bit so I could be a father, and I could be a good man and a husband, and I could make money, and I just had to figure it all out, put the pieces together. So I needed some time, and I needed some money. So I asked if I could work third shift all day. I would essentially live stream on Twitch. I would do educational content around esports, telling people like, this is how I did it. This is how I became one of the best players at 5-6 different games. I'm gonna teach you everything I know so that you can be the best player. And if you're a single man and you got nothing better to do and you wanna go play on that stage, I'll help you get there. But for me, I have children and I have different priorities now. But that's what I did. So I would live stream that content all day. About midnight, I would go over to Burger King on Auburn and Kilburn. I would empty those freezer trucks and clean the fryers and stuff just to make some money to keep me on my feet. And thank God, eventually, the live streaming and everything took off for me. That's when we kind of entered the battle right phase. I didn't have to keep doing that anymore. And that's when esports actually just started paying my bills. And I felt like at the time, everything was coming together. A weird thing how everything works out. I'm telling you, the radish farmers. You think, giving up your dream, you're not playing pro anymore. Oh my gosh, it's the end of the world. But then you realize, I have it all now. I've got the money. I'm doing what I love to do. I didn't betray my family. My son loves me. We have a great relationship. You have it all, so it all worked out. As far as a career, this or that, you can always make it happen. Always, always, always you can make it happen. You'll find a way. And it'll be your passion for it that helps you find a way. And if other people don't see the way, that's okay. They don't need to see it. Only you need to see it. The thing about the radish farmers and the breaking the arm, or how life works out one way or another, you gotta stop trying to play God. It's a strange thing. As much as I talk about trying to control outcomes and this and that, it's like you pull from both ends. You gotta try to control the outcome at the same time, realize that you're not in control of the outcome. I think there's something to it too of, I think ups and downs, I think are a real thing. I think it's almost like a law of the universe or something, that life ebbs and flows. There's ups and downs, and so when you're up, you gotta know, prepare yourself, because the down is coming. And when you're down, same thing, know that just hang on. It'll pick up for you, and it'll all somehow work out, But I just want people to take life more seriously. Let's put that in there. I know it's just a game, but it's not just a game. You gotta take it way more seriously.